Pozdravljeni na današnjem posebnem srečanju, ki ga prirejamo med Inštitutom Novejše in z gostom profesorjem dr. Karelom Novotným. Dovolite za začetek kratek manjši uvod. Profesor Karel Novotný je profesor filozofije na Fakulteti za humanistiko Karlove univerze v Pragi. Je tudi znanstveni svetnik v Inštitutu za filozofijo pri Akademiji znanosti Češke republike. Njegovo znanstveno in pedagoško ukvarjanje sega na področje hermeneutike, nemške klasične filozofije, filozofije zgodovine, raziskave se seveda vežejo tudi na nemško in francosko sodobno fenomenologijo in filozofsko filologijo. Je avtor številnih znanstvenih del, kjer raziskuje predvsem klasične in novejše teorije fenomenalnosti, posebno pozornost pa posveča oziroma se z njim namenja obravnavi telesnosti, sveta in narave, referenco na avtorje, kot so Neue Jan Patočka, in številni drugi. S profesorjem Hansom Reinerjem Zekom sta pred leti ustanovila in tudi vodita Srednjeevropski inštitut za filozofijo v Pragi, s katerim pa naš inštitut, Inštitut Fenomenologije, več desetletij že sodeluje. Zato imamo priložnost, da smo še toliko bolj veseli, da imamo danes profesorja Novotnýja med nami, kajti približno 30 let že sodelujemo, oba inštituta že 30 let sodelujeta, imamo pa posebno priložnost, da profesorju Karelu Novotnýju izrazimo še eno ob eni posebni obletnici njegovi, in sicer rojstnodnevni. So, Professor Novotný, on behalf of Institute Novejše and all our guests, I would like to congratulate you on your 16th birthday. So thank you very much that we have an opportunity to have you in this time here in Ljubljana. Na začetku današnjega predavanja, današnjega srečanja pa bi prosila profesorja Jana Patočka, če lahko uvodoma na kratko predstavi pravzaprav 30-letno sodelovanje oziroma 30-letno sodelovanja obeh inštitutov. To pa posledilo predavanje, se pravi z naslovom Onstran fenomenov, Koraki, nazaj k notranjosti, narave in življenja.
Hvala lepa, tudi meni mi je drago, da prijatelji ob 60-letnici lahko, kako bi rekel, nekako to predavanje v nekem kontekstu, ki seveda ima pa veliko zgodovino. Oziroma, če rečem velika zgodovina, je to že ena observacija, ki pa po mojem ni toliko, kako bi rekel, izmišljena. Prvi kontakti, ki so bili tu vzpostavljeni, seveda so bili s krogom, disidentskim krogom v Pragi, okrog filozofa Jana Patočke. In jaz prvi stiki, ki sem pač s tem krogom imel, so bili ilegalne pravzaprav publikacije, tako imenovani sešiti, jih imam nekako še shranjene kot posebne predvsebnosti. Takrat seveda nisem vedel, da se bomo skupaj sestali in da bo to lahko zelo pomembna, celo filozofska stvar. In to je zame največ. Mogoče v tem zelo neubožnem času, ampak tudi poraznem času, ki nas zdaj preči, je bila vendarle vzpodbuda. Tako so se določeni stiki vzpostavili, ki niso bili naprej predvideni. noben ekonomist jih ni predvideval, noben politik jih ni predvideval nič. Bili so čisto filozofski. Jaz ne bom šel v podrobnosti, kako je to bilo, ta prva srečanja, ki so bila, bom kar malo preskočil in šel v to, torej naše ključno srečanje je potem bilo ob prevodih Heideggerovega dela Bit in čas v slovenščino, kjer pravzaprav se je nekako paralelno odvijal slovenski in češki prevod in te konference, ki se je imel na Karlovi univerzi takrat, ko je bilo to tema ravno prevajanja Heideggera, tam sredi 90-ih let ne bom nikoli pozabil. Torej, to je bilo nekaj, kar potem, kako bi rekel, je določilo konstelacijo in potem seveda so sledila tudi povabila ob slovenskem prevodu, kjer je sodeloval Pavel Mervart, poleg Hvatika, so bili to najmlajši študentje od Jana Patočke, ki so tudi tisto leto 68 zelo, kako bi rekel, osebno težko pristali. Ampak potem smo šli naprej, in tisto, kar mene za današnje dni tudi, kar se tiče Evrope, pa vse to, posebej recimo nagovarja, pa kar mi da eno perspektivo je potem, kako so se oblikovale inštitucije v Pragi in to, kar imamo s tem Bogim inštitutom, če tako rečem, Bogim skromnim inštitutom ali pa majhnim inštitutom Nove revije v Ljubljani, da je bilo to speto seveda z takimi dogodki, kot je bila potem ob obletnici, 150. obletnici Husserlovih logičnih raziskav v Olomoucu, je to v nekih zelo prostih razgovorih bila podlaga, da se osnuje svetovna fenomenološka organizacija in srednjeevropska fenomenološka organizacija. To je, kako bi rekel, veliko naprej spravilo celotno observacijo in potem je bil leta 2010 na podlagi fenomenološkega centra v Pragi ustanovljen Srednjeevropski inštitut za filozofijo, ki združuje ljudi te fenomenološke in tudi širše provenience. To ni, kako bi rekel, da bi bilo zdaj to kakorkoli omejeno, ampak je potem v naslednjih letih imel vpliv na razvoj filozofije v Pragi, na Karlovi univerzi, na inštitutu za znanosti, kjer tudi kolega Peter Travnik, Peter je zdaj, da so se vzpostavili centralni vidiki. Centralni vidiki, v katerih je potem so potekale raziskave na območju fenomenologije v Evropi. Zdaj tu bi lahko potem navedel, recimo od kolega Karela Novotnega, da je bil pred 15 leti pač prisoten na tej konferenci, ki smo jo imeli glede Evrope, humanosti in tako naprej v Ljubljani. In da je to potem sprožilo tudi ene osnove za sedanjo srednjeevropsko in vzhodnoevropsko fenomenološko konferenco, da so tu položene neke zadeve. Bolj ključno od tega je, seveda, da so se tu razvile popolnoma tematske stvari. In ena od teh tematskih stvari se je nekako, smo imeli priložnost prejšnje leto asistirati, ko smo objavili to številko fenomene na temo Eugena Finka, kjer pravzaprav se je šlo za projekt, ki se je odvijal paralelno v Wuppertalu, Pragi. In smo tu nekako v Sloveniji temu ne samo asistirali, ampak mislim, da smo to zadevo kar precej v dobri meri podprli in da ne bo ostala samo v nekem registru. Druga zadeva je, ki je še bolj važna, so pa tematske zadeve in tu bi lahko Krobu v Pragi dal seveda vso priznanje, da je seveda uspel obdržati v refleksiji ključne fenomenološke teme. Mislim, da se niso mogli boljše oddolžiti Janu Patočki, kot so se na ta način. Te teme, žal mi je, ampak v Sloveniji imam s tem velike težave. Da ne bom rekel nepremostljive težave, ker ti zato obstaja samo parcialen interes. Obstaja, kako bi rekel, nečesa, ker bi lahko rekli mi, da ima raziskovalna perspektiva. To poudarjam zaradi tega, ker se zna zgoditi, da bo vse to v par letih šlo nekako mimo, da pač ne bomo mogli več tega zagona zajeti. Zaradi tega se mi zdi zelo pomembno, da imamo danes to predavanje od Karla, ki nas tako osredotoči na nekatere stvari, oziroma daje vsaj priložnost, da lahko gremo v kakršnekoli tej perspektivi. To imam za uvod, ne bom se spuščal, seveda, to je bilo ogromno umestnih postaj, štikov in vsega tega, ampak najbolj važno je, kaj imamo tu refleksijsko, filozofsko ali kakorkoli opraviti z nadaljno perspektivo.
So first of all, thank you very much there for the invitation, so that I could come again to Ljubljana after 19 years. This was the founding conference of Novejše Foundation, I'm very happy to be here. Thank you very much. And I would very briefly present a paper about my research. But first, I would like to inform you about, very briefly, about our activities. This is an institute not so successful like Neue at all. We have no juridic subjectivity and no budgets, etc. But we do some research for, first of all, with Onstran that you know probably. This was my philosophical teacher and mentor in the last 20 years. So we founded this institute in 2009 and have many international partners, like Jan Patočka, for example, already more than 10 years. And we have research projects. One of them was just mentioned because Neue became partner of this research project on origin think and French fenomenology. There is another project about the phases of nature. And my talk is connected with both of these projects. The Institute is connected with Faculty of Humanities. We are two directors of the Institute. Hans-Reiner is director at the Faculty of Humanities. I just wanted to inform you that we have Erasmus Plus program with University of Ljubljana for undergraduate, master and PhD students. In case you have students who would be interested, this is the time now to apply. And the other institution, our institute is associated is Institute of Philosophy of the Academy of Sciences of the Czech Republic, and there also are some possibilities for postdoc candidates. For example, here you can see it's also now opened the call for applications for postdoc researchers. So this is what I wanted to share with you. You might have students or younger colleagues who are looking for a possibility to work in philosophy. And now I would start with my paper. I call it Beyond Phenomena, Steps Back to Nature and Life, Interiority, and I will step by step explain what I mean by this title. And by a very general introduction, if you allow, to ask, are phenomena merely, as it were, the surface that we have to pierce through to get to things in themselves? In some sciences, phenomenology is seen as just one of the first preliminary steps of research, one that should eventually be left behind in the course of a very methodical investigation into the truth about things. For other sciences, there is no need for phenomenology at all. Such a step can be skipped outright, since no mediation between things and phenomena takes place there. So then we can ask why in philosophy is there still a need to ask about the nature of phenomena, or even a need to save phenomena? The short answer is because our everyday experience is made up of phenomena. We all live in perceptions, thought, fantasies and recollection, all of which can be called phenomena. Although every single one of us lives in phenomena as a matter of fact, that fact can be conceived in very different ways, though. As a philosopher trained in sciences, Edmund Husserl has approached this fact in a kind of a positivist way, in Austrian tradition, based on its pure, that is, metaphysically neutral description. His descriptive approach speaks of it in the very general terms of lived experience, in German Erleben. According to Husserl, the least that we can say is that no matter what the origin and status of phenomena might be, they do appear in and through our lived experience. This constitutes the starting point of his phenomenology, the inaugural move of his original investigation into the conditions of possibility of true knowledge in his early works in 1901, but that remained effective until his very last explorations of the nature of phenomena in the 30s. But is it the appropriate point of departure? I mean, what if lived experience itself is just one phenomenon amongst others to be explored in its conditions of possibility, just like the events and beings in the time and space of our world? In that case, would we not be required to take a step back to an even more general level of description when looking for a comprehension of what phenomena are? What kind of phenomenology could get us there? Can the phenomenon itself help us? And if so, what kind of general description of it would open the way forward? As for the question regarding where this event of opening transpires, whereby the phenomenon itself appears, where the phenomena in their appearing come or originate from, the responses differ considerably in phenomenology itself. For Edmund Husserl and Michel André, for example, a French author, it's the immanence of lived experience, the famous Cartesian cogito, but liberated from any trace of substantiality, of course, that would make it into a res, a thing in space and time, a last remnant of the world. So this direction is one path to take in the investigation of the nature of phenomena in the event of their appearing. For others, though, such as Eugen Fink, by contrast, the only place where such an event can originally produce itself is a world, or the world, taken as the all-encompassing place of all places, and an atopos at the same time for Fink, because as the origin of our lived experiences, it has to differ from their objects, from the worldly entities and events as they appear to us. For Fink, the origin of appearing can be no place in the world as we conceive it from within the framework of our categories of objects, beings, placed in the space and time. Just like for Husserl and Henri, these authors, like Fink, would all agree that we could almost only negatively conceive of this origin of appearing in terms of an extra-temporal and extra-spatial event that gives or produces all intra-worldly events as phenomena in time and space of our world, the life world. But unlike Husserl, Fink denies that such a giving of phenomena is originated and has somehow its source in the living experience of our consciousness. Husserl, as we all know, calls giving or production of phenomena a sense constitution in and through transcendental consciousness, meaning not non-worldly or pre-worldly origin of the world. Fink denies it because he sees the necessity to step back from this level of description to a deeper one that would let us understand that even our consciousness is a derived phenomenon whose lived experiencing, including its transcendental horizons of sense, depend of an event that would produce from and through itself, and that differs from any projection that the consciousness would make. This move in Fink's philosophy doesn't mean any attempt of naturalization of consciousness, to be sure. Fink is as far as Husserl from this tendency and tries to radicalize to the opposition to it even. So we would not speak about I didn't want to speak in my talk about the steps back from conscious phenomenon to the nature in the sense of physiological or physicalist explication by causal processes in the world that are supposed to explain all entities and events in space and time from this so-called naturalistic attitude that is common to all sciences almost. And this is because this attitude is based on the projections of consciousness, of its tendency to objectify, to put being as equal to object that can be elucidated by the transcendental inquiry into its conditions of possibility, for example, as Husserl used to do it. The step back from this level of phenomenological elucidation to the nature means rather, in Fink, a step back to physics, the ancient idea of an auto-production of reality, that the philosophers like Fink understand as a kind of primary opening that, in his opinion, opens or gives a space and let a time for all the phenomena, including our consciousness itself. So this presents us with the broad extremes within which the inquiry into the phenomenological concepts of phenomenality already can be situated, namely between the immanence of lived experience, as it is radicalized from Husserl to Michel Henry on the one end, and the self-openness of the physis through phenomena from the other side, so to say, on the other end. This, to repeat it again, is not the only framework for the philosophy to approach the phenomena or realities. I already mentioned the attempts to naturalize the consciousness and its relation to the world through lived experience in its immanence. On the one hand, the dominant tendency in the philosophy that this naturalization that phenomenology opposes in all figures that I know. There are exceptions. Merleau-Ponty tried to bridge phenomenology with empirical research, but these are really exceptions. But there is also a phenomenological opposition that would try to save phenomena, not only from their dissolution in the causal relations, but also from their transcendental or speculative or metaphysical closure. I will briefly mention these three approaches in my talk. So, again, to the core question, why care about the phenomena at all? We can say that even in the sciences there is a need to start somewhere in a common experience that we all share. To start with something that is given and obvious to everybody. In the everyday situations, we refer to such given things or events directly. We just don't need to call them phenomena. They are just issues that matters right now for us. The first step to care about the appearing is the distance from as direct reference, a step back that used to be even a skeptical one. It just seems to be the case. The thing or event just appears to be. It might be only an appearance, an illusion that we refer to. And then we go further and hasten to establish a first difference between appearance, what appears to be, and the being itself, or the thing or event. There, the philosophy and sciences start their investigations. Plato goes through the mere phenomena to the true beings or forms, and Aristoteles tried back to save them. And today we have a similar move in the contemporary phenomenology, a philosophical movement that was originally established by Edmund Husserl as a science of phenomena in their appearing. One tendency to establish the forms or idee, essences, Wesen of phenomena, and to elucidate their appearing from out these structures as cases of general patterns. And then we have the other tendency, in reaction to Husserl, still in phenomenology, to liberate phenomena from those eidetic structures, a priori forms, still too rigid and anthropocentric, projective, alienating the true being of phenomena in itself. That is why Merleau-Ponty, for example, will speak in his late texts about wild essences, Wesen sauvage, or brute being, l'être brut, And many authors, starting with Heidegger, will conceive the appearing of phenomena in terms of the event, irreducible to consciousness and its objects, preceding them, enabling them. At the beginning of this development, to repeat it, was the first and fundamental difference there for Husserl, that of the appearing object, called phenomenon or erscheinendes, and its appearing erscheinen, as lived experience, erleben itself. Why is that a difference or even a fundamental one? Because the latter, the appearing itself, as an event of lived experience, can never appear as an object, as all objects always are transcendent in relation to lived experience itself, through which and thanks to which they only can be given. This elementary transcendence of the object opens, though, an essential relation, at the same time a relation that will be fully elaborated and lately called by Husserl the universal a priori correlation between the experience and its objects, the consciousness and its world. This is the framework for all knowledge and praxis for Husserl. Apparently, nothing exceeds it. Everything, every single being is given inside of this correlation that can only be more and more explored, but never left behind. All sciences move in such a correlation, according to Husserl, even if some of them would deny it in favor of the claim of various forms of their realism. The reality of the true beings that are not conditioned by our experience. The experience is, on the contrary, for some realists, at most just one of the realities, a flatus vocis, an effect of language games. Now, this is not the standpoint of phenomenology, and this is also not the discussion that I would like to follow here either, despite of its actuality today. What I want to touch upon is the recent discussion inside of phenomenology about its own research topic, and this is the phenomena itself and its appearing. How to conceive them, no matter if we admit or not that it's through their medium that we face the reality of all kind. So far, some introductory remarks and questions. Now I come to a brief presentation of this one path, in this one direction, how we can take step back from phenomenology to think the origin of phenomena. I have mentioned it already. At one side, there is a position of philosophers like Eugen Fink, and today Renaud Barbaras, a professor emeritus at the University of Paris I, who propose and defend what they call a cosmological philosophy. According to this approach, the reality we live in is produced by the manifestation of the world itself. I quote the first lines of the last paper by Barbaras, published recently in the proceedings of a conference about the ideas of phenomenology that took place in Nice 2 years ago, because it was its inspiration for the composition of my paper. So I quote Renaud Barbaras: I will take as my starting point what Husserl precisely defined as the task of phenomenology, namely the elaboration of correlational a priori. And I would like to show that fidelity to this a priori leads us to go beyond the categories that Husserl implements to a cosmology which, resolutely speculative, which Fink had seen the need for, is indistinguishable from metaphysics. Clear standpoint, no phenomenology possible without a step back to metaphysics, which is a step back into the event that produces not only the worldly phenomena, but also the very subject to whom they appear in an universal and a priori correlation. This is the explicit metaphysical step for Barbaras, whereas for Fink, a tentative way to restore the original sense of experience against its ontification is precisely, at least in terminology, precisely a critical move against the metaphysics in its traditional, but also in its phenomenological sense in Husserl. So there is not just one cosmological position that they would share, but what Fink and Barbaras have in common is the destitution of the primacy that the classical phenomenology in Husserl still attributed to the fundamental difference between the phenomenon as transcendent in relation to our lived experience, in favor of a way more fundamental cosmological difference between the appearing at this level of correlations in our life world on the one side, and the manifestation of the cosmos itself on the other side, that precedes the both poles of the classical correlation. And produces them in a way, holding them open for each other. Fink calls this manifestation a big movement of appearing, like, for example, in the following sentence. I quote his lecture on Alles und Nichts. The word movement of appearance is a movement that runs counter to itself, is flow and counterflow, growth and waning, emergence and decay. Or another quotation from the course about world and infinitude. The world is not a structure already produced, a container in which things have place, duration and appearance. It is the originary production itself. Or another passage from an article published later in Neue Konzepte. The dimensions of the world are intertwined in an incessant movement for which we have no ontic parables. It's the great movement of appearance which exposes finite things into the open, and after the allotted time of being, takes them back into the formless ground. So this quotation at the end shows the proximity to the classical idea of physis of the Greek philosophers that Fink really used in his writings and tries to modify in his own non-metaphysical philosophy. Barbaras also uses the concept of movement and production when speaking of this primary manifestation as event that produces our phenomena and makes them possible and makes possible their appearing to us as the secondary manifestation. And this is that of the correlation that Husserl studied exclusively. So this is a kind of move beyond phenomenology to a deeper level of description of the same phenomena that we live in our life world as manifestation. And if I have time, I would illustrate it on one example of the space, how phenomenology and cosmology approach the phenomenon of space. For Fink, the phenomenological analysis of space, starting from the lived body as the 0 point of spatial orientations of the life world, which is really for Husserl the starting point of the reconstruction, how the space is constituted for us. For Fink, this approach never managed to grasp the world itself as that which truly gives the space. Because obviously we don't give us the space, we are in the space. This is already there. And the phenomenology with this starting point can never grasp it, this pre-givenness of the space. That's why we need another starting point. We need to go beyond phenomenology in this sense. For the spatiality of horizons of experience as addressed by Husserl is only studied in terms of their genesis in the subjective power of constituting objects. The bodily I can that Husserl finally refers at and studies reflexively on the basis of analysis of their donation in sensible experience. This spatiality therefore concerns only the intra-mundane sphere. So this is what happens in the world, not the world itself. For Fink, therefore, the true origin of space surrounding us in our life world, the space with its oriented character, such as that of up and down, right and left, proximity and distance, is not, as for Husserl, linked to the power of the self-movement of embodied subjectivity of the I can, starting from the 0 point of the lived body. The fact remains that these orientations are nonetheless given in the original phenomena, which means, according to Fink, this oriented character of space is original, ur-phenomenal, and not just a correlate of our projection, of our lived experience of spatial objects. The move beyond the phenomenology as analysis and interpretation of this correlation means we have to conceive this oriented space, while accessible to phenomenological description, as ultimately belonging to the unfolding of the world itself. The notion of belonging in the similar and more general sense, becomes then central notion for the project of René Barbaras, as we can see already in the title of his last book, called precisely Belonging, Appartenance. Of course, I will not enter into details of both cosmological perspective on the space in Fink and Barbaras. I published a paper here in Phenomena 2 years ago about this topic. I just want to point out into the direction of the speculative thinking that the both authors mobilize in order to approach the very origin of our phenomena, like the space, for example. So here is a hint to this line of speculative thinking in Fink, who opposes his approach to phenomenology, to Husserl. I quote, "Space is the separation of the realms of above, below, in front, behind, but also near and far, here and there. Although the separation has always already happened, it's not a movement that we could ever experience. Rather, it's the original presupposition that makes all our experience possible. Against the perspective of the phenomenological approach to the origin of the oriented space, that can't skip its anchorage in the zero-point position of the lived bodies, in its embodied subjectivity, Fink advances the cosmological perspective of his own. He writes, rather, the original phenomenological orientation belongs to the space of the world. This space of the world is beyond everything, even beyond the most distant there, and it is in the nearest here. It floats almost between the here, always the here of my lived body, and the most distant thinkable there of open limitlessness, but in such a way that the here and the there come from the horizon of world space itself." So something that would be impossible for Husserl to sign, to be in accordance with. And this is the move of cosmology that is not wrong, because we are in the space that is already there. We orient us in the space from our zero point of bodily experience, but we can do so because there are already these orientations opened by the world itself. So this is what Fink wants to suggest against the phenomenology. The oriented space in correlation to embodied zero points of the subjective perspectives is always already included in an original oriented space produced by the movement of the world itself. And this precisely because the body itself is in a way produced by the same movement. This is a new idea, this one, that we can't find in Fink, but that Barbaras came with. I quote his important book, Dynamics of Manifestation, from 2013. Thus, far from being that which constantly precedes and underlies it, the substratum of movement, that is the organism, the body, is constituted in movement itself, and has no other reality than this being constituted. So he says, he speaks not about the constitution in Husserlian sense, he speaks about the movement of the world itself that gives all bodies. This is for him the constitution. So the body is not something that underlies the movement, but this is one of the results of movement. So this is the new idea that our bodies are products of world movement itself. In the last book on belonging, apartnance, already mentions, Barbaras goes even further and radicalizes this idea. He writes, there is the world as absolute source, the original explosion, deflagration. In French, this is a term that late Merleau-Ponty used already in a similar context, from which all beings proceed. There is the world as ontic multiplicity arising from this arch event. Not sure about the English translation. In French, this is archi-événement. This is more than event. This is original event, arch event. There is finally the world as form. It is sedimentation of the origin within the multiple, being understood that this form is produced. It is mediated by movements arising from the original event. So there is original event that produces everything, all bodies, including our lived bodies themselves. The oriented space, as a form of our experience, is a kind of sedimentation of the original production arising from the original event, which is the origin of both poles of the classical phenomenological correlation, consciousness and objects, and of its mediation through the space as well. In this way, the question of the origin of phenomenality is now, from a cosmological point of view, taken up again in the light of the following new concepts. Barbaras asked himself, how can the original event of deflagration be transformed into the emergence of the appearing? In other words, how can the disparate moments resulting from deflagration open up a place and thereby become in some way subjects? The answer he proposes lies in the necessity of the desire for the world, which arises through the world itself, in that it is the world itself as a movement of original production that gives rise to the multiplicity of bodies desiring to regain their belonging, appartenance. Now, all bodies as separated individuals are moved by a tension between their places, constituted by the movement of the world, and the world itself as their ground. All bodies tending towards the ground from which they were separated by an extratemporal and space-giving event of deflagration. The cosmological origin of spatiality is thus also what makes this tension possible, arising from the explosion that creates the multiplicity of separate beings. As Fink also claimed it, I quote his lecture about world and finitude. In the dispersion of space and time, the open is kept open, in which things can then be gathered and separated. So this is how the cosmological philosophers try to explain how the space is open to us before we come into it from our 0 points of orientations linked to our bodies. Now this is just an example how the speculative thinking can proceed when it wants to show our belonging to the world as a whole. And I agree with them. This is our situation. We all belong to one world. And so this is completely legitimate to try to think it. To try to think this belonging to the one world. So I think cosmological philosophy is a legitimate attempt to think our situation. And we might even call this world as a whole as nature. And this is the sense in which I used it in the title of my talk. But of course there are differences between the concept of cosmos and nature. This is obviously not the same. What is the same is the philosophical inspiration for both, and this is the old concept of the physis, the first name of nature as an auto-production of being through movement. A powerful inspiration for philosophical idea of reality, even in the phenomenological movement and its metaphysical or speculative radicalization or overcoming. Or is that the last word about the origin of the universal correlation that articulates our belonging to the world, including the spatial articulation of this relation? No, I don't think so. Because, in my opinion, we cannot just bypass in this way the originality of the movement of embodied life as a capacity of the self-movement that Husserl already discovered in his analysis. I don't believe that our movement of desire, this longing, could be explained uniquely by its belonging to the big movement of the cosmos itself, no matter how we would conceive it, because it has, at least partly, its source in itself. A name for this source is the emptiness of the heart, for example, die Leere des Herzens, as Max Scheler used it in his phenomenological approach to explain the origin of space and time of our world. And we can also find in the late Husserl a reference to desire and longing as the source of intentionality, is genetic phenomenology. And of course I will not enter in a presentation of this concept. I just wanted to make a reference to this other origin of appearing, that the cosmological philosophy doesn't want to see. There are philosophers like Jan Patočka who try a kind of synthesis between what is true in cosmological philosophy and what, on the contrary, remain unseen by the cosmologist as a source of appearing. I know it's late already. I will not read everything I prepared. I just want to mention that Patočka has another position than Fink, even if he was amazed his whole life by what Eugen Fink has accomplished. Just biographical note, Patočka came as a student to Freiburg in 1933 to study Husserlian phenomenology, and Husserl, already emeritus, and outside of academia, because of the Nazi laws, asked Eugen Finka, tell Patočka something about the phenomenon, make him an introduction to phenomenology. So Patočka, as a very young student, was already very close to Fink, and he kept this until the end of his life, but he didn't accept Fink's cosmological philosophy. At least I read it like this. And the best document that proves it is the lecture Fenomenology and Metaphysics of Movement that Patočka wrote for a special occasion when he was invited by Eugen Fink to Freiburg to speak in the framework of Studium Generale about his philosophy. I will not go into details, but in this lecture he says, he defends a thesis that the subjective movement realizes by its capacity of self-determination a meaning which is not given beforehand as object of representation. It's rather an expression of an accommodation between a self-movement of the body and its non-appearing counterpart. So this is the position of Patočka in between cosmological overcoming of phenomenology and the phenomenology of body as we know it from late Husserl and Merleau-Ponty. And this position leads to two directions. First, to the mediation of this movement of expression which produces the appearing of phenomena in the space, oriented around the embodied subject. And second, to the subjective source of the movement as an expression of a self. So the subject self is not abandoned in this philosophy. The first direction goes in this sense: the space in which the movement realizes its possibilities of action as given from the surrounding world is one of the virtualities. The status of the space that enables the action, going always from 0 point of the body in such oriented directions, is a projection of an empty space. This projection of an empty space is therefore no sedimentation of cosmological movement of the world itself. So the openness of the space doesn't come from the world, but it's our projection. For Patočka, following Max Scheler in this point. Namely, his idea of emptiness of our heart. So he tries to show that at the origin of oriented space of our given phenomena, we have to admit a projection of whole of the empty space. There is a quotation, maybe I will skip it because the idea I just explain that. And this is also the background of his opposition to Fink's cosmological concept. I will conclude my talk by very briefly remarks about the second direction mentioned, namely on the very subjective origin of appearing of phenomena. In the lecture manuscript on Phenomenology and Metaphysics of Movement, there is a hint to this other direction when Patočka writes about the irreducible subjective condition of all appearing of phenomena in terms of movement as expression of an inner self. I quote, what this dynamic of living meaning normally shows itself in is movement as an expression of the inner self. Before I comment briefly on this topic, I just mentioned Patočka is known as the author of the so-called asubjective phenomenology, where the concept of the empty space as an a priori form is used as well to explain how the world as a form of experience shapes all phenomena that come to appear. While this is a true part of his transcendental phenomenology, as an alternative to the cosmological approach to the question of appearing of phenomena, it's important to remark that the subjective movement as an expression of inner self is for Patočka an original fact, irreducible to any a priori structure, principle or form. And this movement of the irreducible subjectivity should be taken in account of as well. Meaning, if there is an asubjective phenomenology in the late Patočka, it doesn't mean that there is no subject playing a role in the relation to phenomena and its an explication of the origin of their appearing. There is a subjective, irreducible subjective moment. And Patočka hints to it in this lecture from 1968. And by this hint, he refers to his earlier philosophy that I want to mention to conclude now. The main idea is that in order to explain and elucidate the possibility of appearing of all phenomena, a step back into the immanence of the life of consciousness is necessary, although difficult to perform. A step back into the lived experience itself that doesn't appear. Husserl was not wrong about it, and this is also one of the reasons why Husserl, Henri, and Patočka, at least Jan Patočka, would warn philosophers against the temptation to naturalize the consciousness. So this is the last step from phenomenology of the universal correlation back to its fundament in a way that I wanted to mention in Henri's terms to the invisible essence of all manifestation. This is the title of his main work, Essence of Manifestation from 1964. And this is another radicalization of the Husserlian or even Cartesian insight in the absolute self-giveness of the lived experience, without which we cannot explain our experience. The adjective use of absolute means in Henri, without any meditation, distance or difference between what appears and the appearing itself. That's why it differs from Husserl. So the last figure of metaphysical foundation of manifestation in its invisible, affective self-giveness is what is the topic for these philosophers. And I will just briefly refer to the way how the young Patočka in the 40s, it means before Michel Henry developed his own philosophy, which comes much later, already conceived this topic. For him as well, there is a way of philosophizing which he clearly opposed to all forms of naturalism, idealism, and realism, which are alienating the subject in its subjectivity. The way of philosophy that aims to catch the life of subjectivity from inside, where nothing other than man is at stake, and not man in general, but each individual struggling and thought penetrating. I quote, it's a personal, intimate, subjective philosophy, which doesn't in any way imply subjectivism or skepticism, which on the contrary are regularly a philosophy precisely non-subjective, alienating the subject in its subjectivity. For Patočka, it's a journey into one's own interior, a radical pursuit of human self-understanding from the last foundations, going against the tendency that the ontology of antiquity had already clearly set out, namely the objectivation of the subject. Here we see the opposition of the young Patočka to the way to make a philosophy from out of the physics, from out the old concept of physics. And this shows an analogy between Henry, who came later, and Jan Patočka, who tried to capture that original non-objectivity of the interior that stands in the foundations of the object. In these manuscripts from the early 40s, he wrote them during the Second World War. Patočka search for the non-objective interior aims, it aims, among other things, to recover in a revised form the idea of performance or synthesis, which is the heart of Husserl's transcendental phenomenology. You can see in this last quotation the proximity. And this revision takes place precisely in favor of the search for a deeper concept of interiority that can underlie the phenomenally mediated correlation with the world. The main textual source concerning Patočka's conception was the lecture Fenomenology and Metaphysics of Movement in the late 60s, but what I refer to now is a short essay from the early 40s, translated into German, French and Italian, entitled The Interior and the Spirit, where the interior or inwardness is characterized as a restlessness of inner concern, a restlessness in and of itself. I quote, this restlessness in itself is known in every moment of life, is thus itself something completely internal, but at the same time it is the condition of possibility of a relation to something external. It is itself, without all distance, the condition of the possibility of all distance. Space, for example. Only where there is something that is not in itself as a still presence, can a real relation arise, not in external sense, a relation is an afterthought on things, but belonging to being, not a relation as an attribute, but as substance itself. Thus, our own life is not perhaps a mere process, but it is a happening in the sense of story and a performance. It's a drama in the most original sense. An event that springs from within, from a non-climax, from an inner now, from an inner emergence. What is remarkable then is the characterization of the event substantial character of the interior, a movement of life that precedes the act of the self. Such pre-self movements or movements of the life intrinsic are the most fundamental in which the self consists. So, I will not go into further details. I think that the idea is already clear, and I go to a conclusion. I know it's late, sorry, sorry for to be so long. So in my paper, I wanted to share some reflections inspired by the very recent discussions of the French colleagues as published in the proceedings of a conference, where very recently they presented their personal ideas of phenomenology, what they practice as phenomenology, and I tried to only hint to one tendency that can be retrospectively viewed as a kind of metaphysical turn in and of phenomenology, so Barbara's cosmology. It just makes explicit what phenomenology always was, but doesn't mean that this would be the only way to practice phenomenology. Of course not. I started my paper by a remark that today there is a need to save phenomena precisely from this tendency to leave a phenomenologic analysis as Husserl practiced it in favor of a more or less explicit move towards even speculative, constructive or metaphysical framing of appearing of phenomena. The need to save phenomena from the particular and limited perspective that each of those framings impose upon them can also be radicalized, as Bruce Begou, one of these French philosophers, a Husserlian scholar originally, now calls for it in his plaidoyer for an anarchic, non-foundationalist phenomenology inspired by Rainer Schürmann. So this is the other phenomenologic opposition to these steps back from phenomenology to origin. And of course there is a space, interval between these metaphysics of different kind, Husserl, Fink, Barbara's, and even Patočka on one hand, and the anarchy on the other hand, that Bruce Begou with Schürmann would suggest as a way to save phenomena, to liberate phenomena. Of course, there is a huge interval between these extreme positions for phenomenology that just can explore new phenomena and stay in the framework of the universal correlation. There is nothing wrong to admit a correlation of phenomena to our ways of experiencing and to try to analyze and understand their regularities or general features, the empirical research confident. So to respect phenomena not only in their singularity, contingency, multiplicity, stressed by Schumann, defending them against the violence of the concept. But when it comes to questions of method of exploration of these regularities of phenomena between the empirical research and its interpretation, when it comes to approaching these questions of method, and it should be a phenomenological approach, then the elements of those different steps back or beyond the correlation may still be taken in consideration. In one way or another, it's in the interest of the founder of phenomenology, Hermann Husserl, to protect the specific character of human experience of life and world from the unjustified and complete naturalization. This would be my opinion. And I remember in this context what Dieter Lomar, the founder of very important phenomenological school at the Husserl archives in Cologne, said about the transcendental phenomenology. As the protagonist of phenomenological school, closely connected with Husserl scholarship and legacy, where for Lomar, the empirical research interpretation has a crucial role. He said something like this about the transcendental phenomenologists recently. They are like children, you know. Who play, you know? They are like playing children, because it's a joyful entertainment to do metaphysics, you know, or transcendental phenomenology. Whereas for him, the genuine phenomenology is hard adult work with empirical data and the research results of the empirical investigations. And this is also a phenomenology that can be done and is practiced today. But as for me, my very modest and humble part, I enjoy the reading of both groups, transcendental phenomenologists and even metaphysicians. I have a pleasure, like a child, to write about their heresies, and I am very grateful that I am still allowed to do it. Thank you, Dan, for the invitation and friendship. Thank you for... for your attention, and I apologize that it was long and maybe technical sometimes, so sorry.
Thank you, Professor Novotný, for your paper. So now it would be the best time to open the discussion or any question, if there are maybe topics for Professor Novotný.
So I have not only the question, but it is the problem of the whole phenomenological attitude, so to say. Because I take that the main question is that when we take phenomena as a critical structure, then we have one direction, philosophical direction, that it is some way stable and so on. But on the other way, we cannot take phenomena just as a critical structure, because phenomena comes from life world, from our experience. And in our experience, we don't have the critical attitude in advance. So, I mean, this is one of the problems, how to take this critical position of phenomenology. I have with this problem for many years, but I think there is a problem of our experience that could be very important in connection with the experiences that we have our days. We have the information society, I don't know, spectator society. We don't have the opportunity to critically observe the phenomena. So this is one of the I would say this is the one of the presuppositions that you put out in your lecture.
I tried to explain it in a way at the beginning of the talk, saying that normally we are immersed in the world without distance. So, but only in the moment we realize that we may be wrong, that we are in a virtual reality, and this is not true, what we see, what we hear, and this is a very common experience nowadays, with all these fake news and things like that. This is something that we really experience, this deception of what we believe, what we see and hear in our daily experience, that we can get this critical distance. We could get this critical distance, but it's not evident. We can stay immersed in this mediality, virtuality of mixed experiences between fake news and reality, without the possibility to step back and ask questions. How could we get beyond this virtuality, and where we would find something like true experience? This is what you mean also? That we don't have easily this possibility to step back and explore the truth? Is it what you mean also?
Yeah, that would mean that we could not take phenomena as a critical structure. This is something that it is not obvious nowadays, that is problematic, and so the whole phenomenological philosophy is confronted with that we are not possible to experience, critically experience the phenomena. It is the difference. You have mentioned that the Greek notion of phenomena, to follow the phenomena. I think nowadays is impossible to say follow the phenomena.
Yeah, I find the example of space still working. Yeah? Because space in which we live is not our production. Yeah? We can articulate our space, we can organize it, but still we can get distance of it and realize that our articulations of space, our symbolic formations of space are enabled by something that the nature or the world gives itself to us. It's very difficult to catch it, yeah? To seize it, to grasp it. Yeah? It's very difficult because we are always in this symbolic world. We are always in these cultural differentiations. So we never have a direct experience of nature or something which is from itself. But still, as Merleau-Ponty would put it, there is a primordial being. It is there. We have no access to articulate, to express, but still our experience is experience of the primary being. Because it's sensible, because we hear, we see, we are in touch, we are drive to. So it exists. It's difficult to get access to it. It's so obvious, the access is so obvious that it's difficult to reconstruct it. And phenomenology is only one way to try to do it. But I still think it is possible because it's necessary to try to do it.
I agree.
Good.
My observation was very similar, but you already answered the question, because during that I was questioning if we are just a witness of existing, what remains actually. And now when you talk with Dejan, you said that we are not possible to experience not only the phenomenons, but are we actually in a position to experience the life itself? So what remains?
Yeah, I still think that our experiences are articulated in a cultural way always, but in this phenomena speaks something else, express something else, and this is our life, or the life in us at one side, and it's the nature or the world at the other side. I still think that it's like that. Yeah.
It's like a witness.
And phenomenology is maybe a wrong attempt to catch this sphere or medium in the middle between the life in us and the living or existing nature that enables us to exist at all. Yeah. So there is no pure nature, there is no pure life, everything is mediated by cultural articulation, ritualities, etc., etc. But still in these articulations express itself, life in its relationship to the nature. For example, the bodily life in relation to nature. This is something I still believe exists and hold the experience. Man may be naive, yeah.
But that was something that also Jan Patočka and Eugen Fink has put.
Yeah, and this position of Reno Babas, you cannot really agree because it's so metaphysical. Arc event that creates everything. But it is a legitimate in the sense that he tries to describe and understand our belonging to the world, to this encompassing reality that we cannot deny. We cannot just say every community lives in a bubble and that's it. No. We can communicate across the bubbles. We do communicate across the bubbles. So there is something common. that hold it. Yeah? How conceive it, how to grasp it. Difficult, yeah? But that's why philosophy exists. to do the impossible task that nobody else tries to do, because it's a mission impossible somehow. Metaphysics, etc. So I would defend phenomenology in this way. And I like it. I like to read phenomenologists, even if they are maybe naive in some ways. Of course they are. But yeah, it's fascinating for me to follow them until I can follow them at all. So, yeah.
Yes, I have a question. When you were speaking about Patočka, right? He, if I understood it correctly, he said that ultimately there is this movement, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I was maybe thinking a little bit critically of Patočka. I mean, can you have movement without having its opposite, non-movement stillness, for example? I don't know. Well, I don't know much of Patočka, but yeah, it's like, yeah. I mean, maybe we were talking about this right now. So how can, you know, there is still some stillness sometimes that we experience it, right? Even though we experience movement, and I'm trying to understand. Maybe you know, maybe for some people, stillness is not so separate from movement. Maybe, you know, how can you? Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for the question. There is a classical answer in phenomenology, and this is the earth. The earth doesn't move. Yeah? Husserl has a beautiful manuscript about the earth that doesn't move. And this character of the earth, that it doesn't move, is a presupposition of all movement. As we do it and perceive it, it means in the phenomenological terms. Yeah? If we speak about physics, then this is another discourse, this is another framework. But if we stay in our experience of movement, as a moving beings, there is a necessary referent of all movements, and this is the earth we are standing on, and that we transport with us even in the spaceships. He says, Husserl, 1934, there was no spaceships there, but he said, even if the spaceships, we need this function of ground that doesn't move. And this is the condition of our existence, which is movement. So this would be the classical reply from phenomenologists like Husserl, and Patočka agrees with him. He quotes him and uses this example. Now, if you read the Barbaras, everything is movement. So you can't find bodies or earth as something that would not be produced by the cosmic movement of becoming being. That's one of the reasons I have difficulties to accept this philosophy, because there are no objects, there are no bodies, there are no earth, so everything is movement. Okay, Fichte was also a philosopher like this, Hegel is also a philosopher like this, and they see something real, yeah? But it's monismus, it's monistic view of reality that I would say doesn't correspond to our experience. It can explain the totality of being from some perspective, but this perspective doesn't correspond to my experience. I'm standing on the earth. I need it. I don't understand the earth at all. I just can reflect about its function in my experience. I don't know what is the earth in this function. I just know that this is the condition of my movement. I cannot explain it by the movement of spirit or something like that with Hegel or with another monistic philosophers like Michel Henry also is a monistic philosopher. He cannot explain this fact of standing on the earth as condition of all life. He doesn't see it at all. Because he's obsessed with his explanation of all beings originated by life. And okay, he has right from his point of view, but it doesn't correspond to my experience. I feel something else in my life, not just this self-affection in life. I feel also something else. So maybe there is no system of phenomenological philosophy that could explain everything, but Husserl was very close to this because he didn't care about system. He just described our experiences, and in this way he discovered a lot of important things. He didn't care about systematic unity of metaphysics. Okay, it was important for him too, but what he did in his life was he tried to understand how our experience functions, and he did discover things that are still important for everybody across the cultural differences. The example with the earth is very speaking in my view. So this would be the answer of classical phenomenology, I would say.
There's a big problem with this definition of moment, because the main manipulation today with phenomena is the problem of moment. This is so, but this is the big discussion.
Če mi nobenih več vprašanj bi zaključili. Professor Novotný, thank you very much for your